There are stories that begin with applause, bright lights, and loud celebrations. But the story of Lia and Marco, two Filipino siblings whose voices would one day silence an entire world, began in a place far away from fame. It began in a small coastal neighborhood in Cavite, where the ocean winds carried both hope and hardship through every narrow street. Lia, the older sister, had a calmness in her eyes, the kind that came from learning to be strong long before she was ready. Marco, her younger brother, carried a spark, gentle, humble, but full of a quiet fire that refused to go out. Together, they found comfort in melodies when life around them felt too heavy to hold. Their mother, Elena, worked from sunrise to nightfall, her hands worn from years of stitching clothes for neighbors who could barely pay her back. She never complained. She never expected anything in return. All she wanted was to give her children one thing she never had, the freedom to dream. But dreams were hard to build in a house where rain leaked through the roof every monsoon. Nights grew long when electricity failed, leaving them in darkness. Yet those were the nights Lia and Marco cherished the most. With only candles glowing softly, they sang to each other, not for an audience, not for applause, but because singing made the world feel less frightening for a while. Music became their anchor. It drowned the sound of storms. It softened the pain of empty plates. It made them believe that somewhere beyond those struggling days, life held something kinder, something brighter. They didn't know it yet, but every hardship they faced was shaping the harmonies they would one day share with millions. Every whispered note in the dark was preparing them for a stage they never imagined they would stand on. Their journey didn't begin with confidence. It began with survival, and the courage to keep singing, even when the world around them tried to silence their dreams. As the years passed, Lia and Marco's voices grew stronger, but life around them did not become easier. Every opportunity they reached for seemed just a little too far, just a little too expensive, just a little too impossible for a family trying to survive 1 month at a time. Yet Elena kept saving, tiny amounts, hidden away in folded paper at the back of her sewing drawer. She believed her children deserved a chance to stand in a world larger than their neighborhood. Their first performances were not on stages. They sang by crowded jeepney stops, beside busy markets, and along the sidewalks where strangers passed without looking. Some days, people dropped coins into Marco's small hat. Other days, the siblings returned home with nothing but exhaustion. Still, they never questioned why they kept going. Music was the one thing that felt right in a world filled with uncertainty. Then came the moment that changed everything, an online audition call for America's Got Talent. Elena found it by accident, but something in her heart told her that this was the doorway her children had been waiting for. It took the family weeks to record a video on an old phone and upload it from a borrowed Wi-Fi connection. They expected nothing. They hoped for everything. When the acceptance email finally arrived, their world paused. The journey that followed was overwhelming: paperwork, borrowed money, long flights, and a fear they had never felt before. Stepping onto foreign soil felt like stepping onto another planet. Tall buildings, unfamiliar faces, unfamiliar voices, it was all too big, too loud, too fast. But even in the chaos, Lia reached for Marco's hand, just as she had during thunderstorms back home. Their bond grounded them. It reminded them of the nights when only candlelight lit their faces. It reminded them of the tiny house that held their dreams. The AGT arena looked nothing like the world they came from. Bright lights, massive screens, thousands of seats, it felt like standing in the center of a dream that was still too unreal to trust. Yet somewhere deep inside, they knew one thing. They hadn't come this far to be afraid now. The moment Lia and Marco stepped into the audition hall, the world seemed to stretch out before them, larger and brighter than anything they had ever imagined. The lights overhead felt like tiny suns, warming their skin yet making their hearts race with a fear that nearly stole their breath. They stood on a stage built for legends, a place where dreams were either born or broken within minutes. From their spot at center stage, they could see the faces of thousands staring down from the audience. Far ahead, the judges' table glowed under soft white light, and behind it sat 4 people whose decisions could change their lives forever. But among them, one presence felt heavier than the rest: Simon Cowell. His expression was unreadable, his eyes sharp, observing everything with the intensity of someone who had seen greatness so many times that little surprised him anymore. Lia felt her knees weaken for a moment. She had sung through storms and hunger, yet nothing compared to the weight of this silence, this expectation. Marco, usually the braver one, looked at the floor, trying to steady his breath. But then he felt her hand brush his arm, the same familiar gesture she gave him whenever the world felt too big. It grounded him instantly. A soft hum filled the air as the music cue began, and for a heartbeat, everything around them disappeared. There were no cameras, no judges, no towering lights. Just the memory of their small home, the glow of a candle, the sound of their mother sewing quietly in the corner while they practiced in the dark. When they opened their mouths, the first note floated into the silence like a fragile leaf carried by the wind. The room softened. The judges leaned forward. The audience stilled, as if afraid to miss even a second. And Simon, known for his stern face and sharp critique, did not blink. Not once. It wasn't shock. It wasn't judgment. It was something deeper, something that came only when a person witnessed a kind of honesty too pure to ignore. Their voices rose together, weaving years of struggle, love, and survival into every line. In that moment, they were no longer 2 nervous siblings on a stage. They were storytellers, sharing a piece of their soul with the world. As Lia and Marco moved deeper into their song, something began to shift inside the theater. What started as a simple melody slowly grew into something larger, something powerful enough to wrap around every person in the room and hold them still. Their voices blended with a softness shaped by years of struggle, yet carried a strength born from everything they had survived. Lia's voice rose first, gentle but steady, like a sunrise touching the edges of a quiet morning. Every note she released felt like a memory being set free: nights singing under candlelight, days spent performing on sidewalks, moments when hope felt impossibly distant. Yet here she was, standing in a place she once only dreamed about, letting her voice tell the story her heart had carried for so long. Marco joined her, his tone deeper, warm like a prayer whispered through the wind. His voice carried the echoes of every hardship he had kept hidden behind quiet smiles. The pain he never spoke about, the fears he never wanted his sister or mother to see, he released it all into the music. His harmonies didn't just support hers, they lifted her, strengthened her, completed her. And together, their voices became something extraordinary. The music swelled, rising in waves that swept through the theater. Some audience members raised their hands to their mouths, unable to contain their emotion. Others simply let the tears fall, touched by a story they had never heard but somehow deeply understood. Even the judges, used to thousands of performances, seemed unable to process what was unfolding in front of them. Their expressions softened into awe. Their eyes glistened under the bright studio lights. And Simon, still did not blink. His gaze was locked on the 2 siblings, as if afraid that even closing his eyes for a second would cause him to miss something irreplaceable. Then came the climax. Lia and Marco lifted their final note together, a long, soaring sound filled with every hardship, every sacrifice, every dream their family had held on to. The note carried weight, yet floated with a strange, haunting beauty. It rose into the rafters like a message meant not just for the room, but for the world. When the last vibration faded, a silence washed over the stage. A silence so deep, it felt almost holy. For a long, breathless moment after the final note faded, the theater remained frozen. It was as if the entire room was suspended between disbelief and wonder, caught inside a silence too powerful to break. Lia and Marco stood at the center of it all, hearts pounding, breaths trembling, unsure if the world had heard them, or if the world had simply stopped. Then, slowly, the sound returned. A single clap from the audience grew into another. Then another. And then a wave. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause so loud, so overwhelming, it felt like the walls themselves were shaking. People rose from their seats, unable to stay still. Some cried openly, wiping their faces with trembling hands. Others shouted words they couldn't hear, words that didn't need to be understood to feel the emotion behind them. But none of them looked more stunned than the judges. Howie leaned back in awe. Heidi clasped her hands over her heart. Sophia glanced at the siblings with eyes shining brighter than the stage lights. It was the kind of reaction that performers dream of, the kind that only comes once in a lifetime. And Simon. Simon remained perfectly still. Not with coldness. Not with doubt. But with awe so profound it softened every edge of his usually stern face. He finally blinked, slowly, like someone waking from a dream they didn't want to leave. His expression held no criticism. Only respect. Only admiration. Only the quiet understanding that he had just witnessed something the world would talk about for a long time. Back home in the Philippines, families gathered around tiny TV screens, watching with pride and disbelief as their own made the world listen. In small living rooms and crowded barangays, people cheered so loudly the echoes spilled into the streets. Elena, watching from a simple wooden chair, pressed her hands to her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. For years, she had carried the weight of struggle alone, yet now, she carried the joy of seeing her children shine. The siblings' performance spread across the internet like wildfire. Millions shared it. Millions felt it. Millions believed in something again. In a world often filled with noise, they had created a moment of pure, unfiltered magic. A reminder that miracles still exist, and sometimes, they stand side by side, holding a microphone, singing their truth into the world.